Hello music makers, welcome back. Let's get straight into this one. I've got a little test for you. You are about to hear a before and after for 3 different examples in 3 different genres. And I want you to guess what is the change. Now it's quite subtle, so I'll give you a couple of clues. In every example, only one thing is changing, and it's the same thing in every example. And obviously, as you have already read the title of this video, the change is affecting the feel. So pay attention to that. Here we go with example number 1. Before.
I'm treading water to keep afloat. And we want a birthday when nobody knows. With all of the planets, and I'm down against me for it. But I'm treading water.
And after.
I'm treading water to keep afloat. And we want a birthday when nobody knows. With all of the planets, and I'm down against me for it. But I'm treading water.
Here is example number 2. Before. After. Any theories yet? Example 3. Before. And afterwards. Okay, any guesses? For some of you, that will sound like a subtle difference. For some of you, that might sound really different. I'm hoping for the majority of you, at the very least, you found yourselves tapping your foot more to the after examples, maybe even getting a little wiggle on. Anyway, in general, I hope you noticed the after examples were just a little more bouncy, punchy even. So, what's going on? Is it dynamics? Compression? Transient enhancement, maybe? Or was it swing? Did they swing different? Obviously, it's none of those, because I wouldn't have written the script that way, would I? Sorry, let me put you out of your misery. There was no effects change, there were no sound changes at all. There were no swing changes or note changes. All the chords were the same and all the levels were the same. The only thing that changed was note length. Check out the feel difference if we just change this one note. This doesn't just apply to MIDI either. This affects audio and samples just as much. I've got this stab here. I've chopped that up as a 4-bar pattern here, paying attention to the groove using lots of different lengths. Whereas if you take that same pattern, but all the lengths just line up with the grid, this happens. Not even close. Now, as for which notes or samples you choose to change the length of, unfortunately, that's not a simple answer. As you might expect, it depends on the sound itself, tempo, genre, all manner of factors. I do have a couple of very vague rules of thumb you can try, but it's probably best I just showed you what I did in these 3 examples. And hopefully you'll start to get an ear for the possibilities. Okay, back to the acid line. We heard earlier that shortening just this one note sounds pretty good. There's a few possible reasons. First of all, this gap. Shortening the note before highlights that gap. Let's see what happens if I fill the gap. Yes, I thought so. Far less groovy. Another reason the short note there might work is I tend to find that syncopated notes are often good candidates for being shortened. In simple terms, a syncopated beat just means one that doesn't land on the eighths. So on a 16 grid like this, it's all of these, the in-betweens. These are syncopated beats. So shortening this one should also work, and this one. Nice. In the finished track, I also shortened this one too. Sounds like a stutter, or maybe a deck scratch. No real theory behind that one, it just sounds cool. It definitely helps that this sound has a lot of attack. Another option you can play with is accenting the one by lengthening it. In fact, we could go further with that and just have one long note. And now that makes me want to shorten this one. So there's a good example of how one can set up the other, long into short. Get the placement right on that, and it can sound pretty groovy. The only other thing to change in the final track was these. This is to do with how acid lines are programmed. You'll notice some of these notes are overlapping. When the notes overlap, they glide into one another. This is how you get those slides and glides in acid. So this is acting as a long note, and this is acting as a long note. Interspersed with these short ones, or staccato is the musical term, gives us a very funky line. Now, one final rule of thumb I found works pretty often is at the end of the phrase, we can have this carry all the way to the end. It tends to help the phrase loop. If it's short, can you hear that hesitation, awkwardness when the loop resets? You might do this on purpose if you have a choppy groove. Whereas when it's lengthened at the end, the loop flows seamlessly. As I said, depends on groove, tempo, sound, etc., but those are some things you can keep an ear out for. Now, as for the soulful disco type track, the note length changes were all in the bass. Here is the standard bass, as you might draw it in on MIDI. So, sounds pretty good, but lots of room for improvement. You see, the sad thing is, I can play a real bass guitar, but I don't carry one around with me, and most of the music I make doesn't call for a real bass. Also, this free ample bass guitar instrument I'm using sounds great. The problem is, when you get so comfortable drawing in the notes, you can forget or not be aware of this whole other side of groove. So let me show you the other bass. Remember, no notes changed, no velocities, only note lengths. Hear the difference? Let me talk you through what I did. As you can see, we have that long note on the first beat again. Although these disco drums are quite stompy, so I don't think a short one would be bad either. Yep, different groove, but that also works. If we did that though, I think we'd also have to go short here across the bar. I chose to hold this over the bar. Probably because I'm listening to the vocal there. But it might work shorter because it comes before the beat. So we stop at the kick drum. Yes, that also works. A different type of groove. I would call that a more stompy kind of groove. One isn't necessarily better than the other. You might call this one smoother, but there's still plenty of funk in this one. You can see these short top octaves. Especially here. If I change these to all long notes, you should hear the difference. Let's try that up the octave. So, not terrible, not wrong in any way, but in my opinion, slightly less funky. In general, just the switch up in length can bring a lot of life to the part, I think. This down here, I would call a nothing note. It is possible to make notes so short that they become more percussive, not an actual pitch, especially in bass. Lower frequencies can take some time to develop and for our ears to detect them. So the idea of this very short note down here is to act as percussion, as opposed to any discernible pitch. If it was an audible note, this happens. It trips up the groove a little too much for me, that. Just as a deck can scratch, guitars can too. When you hit a string without pressing the note down, you get these kind of percussive hits, like a tom. And you'll find good bass players often fill out their groove with these in between the notes. So, plenty of things to try there. And don't be thinking this is just specific to disco or bass guitar. Remember, those short scratchy notes worked just as well on the sample and the acid as well. So, worth a try on other stuff. Okay, onto the piano house. It was the piano that changed, obviously. Here's the standard version. Again, something you might program in if you are used to drawing MIDI with your mouse. Everything at the default lengths, at the length of the grid, 8ths or 16s, etc. Whereas if you can get a feel for where your bum and shoulders want to move, you might end up somewhere nearer this. Nice. So again, long on the first beat. There's some extra notes in the lower part down here. Those are helping with the long, short bounce-off method. Extremely short on the syncopated beats here, but also short on this one. Let's hear that as long. Okay, not too bad. I think short sounds better, but it's not bad either way. Again, I've held this over the bar because it's a 1-bar rhythm. This is a little like extending that last note, so the turnaround is smooth. But let's hear it short. Yep, that works too. Gaps are groovy. What's new? Because most of the other notes were short, I thought the switch up here was worth it, but either of those seem to work great. So this pattern is repeated, except for this 4-stab turnaround. And I thought it was best those are, well, stabby, short and stabby. If we listen to the old one, not quite as bouncy. Okie dokie, there we go. Don't forget about your note lengths. I hope that helped some of you. If it did, you know what to do. Press a button or two for me. Don't forget to check the description for relevant links. And until next week, I'll see you in the comments. Bye-bye.